Hey, Diana, did you know your clients will tell you whether your operations are working or not?
Mark, that's the dumbest thing you've ever said.
Ladies and gentlemen, jurists and just curious, welcome to the Successful Barrister podcast. Here you'll learn about marketing, management, and life skills for lawyers that probably won't get you disbarred. Hosted by Marc Whitehead, a seasoned lawyer who remembers when fax machines were cutting edge, and Diana Berry, attorney, COO, and the brains behind the scenes. Together, they are the legal world's most dynamic duo since statutes met regulations. So if you're looking to build a practice, not a prison, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Successful Barrister, where legal legends are made.
And welcome to the Successful Barrister podcast, the podcast for lawyers and law firm leaders about marketing, management, and life skills that probably won't get you disbarred. I am your host, Marc Whitehead, alongside my number one, my co-host, Diana Berry. Hey, Diana, what's going on?
Not much. How are you doing, Mark?
Good. So we've been struggling this morning.
We?
Well, yeah, we are a collective.
We are a
And,
collective. Okay.
Normally we start the podcast with a Hey, Diana, and we just struggled today. We've been struggling with the Hey, Diana.
Well, listeners, just as a heads up, this is a Mark outline, so we're going to be prepared for that. I usually start with the thesis when I make my outlines. I'm trying to convince the listeners or something, or at least impart a particular couple of nuggets. And from there, that's how I develop my Hey, Diana. And Mark's, what we're doing today is teaching.
Yeah.
You're teaching, and it's hard to come up with a Hey, Diana when you're just teaching, but it is something that is near and dear to my heart. So what are you teaching today?
So we're talking about operations and the thesis, which you seem to struggle with, but I think this makes sense to me. So last episode, we talked about strategy. Okay. No, actually, that was 2 episodes ago. Sorry.
Well, a while back, we talked about strategy from the great courses.
The great courses. So moving on, we are going to continue looking at the great courses, the critical business skills for success. And element 2 within that is about operations. So that was 2 episodes ago. I'm remembering now. So 2 episodes ago, we talked about the first part of the great courses and strategy. This time we're going to talk about operations. Why is operations important? My thesis is that operations are important because it's what your client experiences. Your client doesn't experience your marketing so much. They don't experience your strategy or your financial systems or anything like that. What they experience are your operations. Therefore, your operations, good or bad, is naturally going to define how well the relationship between you and your client develops. And we've talked about this often in this podcast because you want to build a lifelong relationship with your clients because that's your retirement money. If it takes a lot of money to get a client. It doesn't take a lot of money and effort to keep a client for their entire life, for the next 30, 40 years. And you can get a tremendous amount of value by developing that relationship, maintaining that relationship, maintaining a good relationship with that client over their lifetime. But it all begins with how well your operations runs because that's how they experience your firm. That's what everything they think about your firm has to deal with how they were dealt with. In other words, how your operations ran. That's my thesis.
I like your thesis. So basically, the end result is good client service, good customer service, and you get there via good operations.
Good operations. Operations basically means how you deliver your legal services, how you manage their case, how you communicate with the client, how you move their file from the initial intake all the way through resolution, if you're in the PI world or the disability world, till the point that they get their check at the end, So how all of that runs determines how well you're going to be able to develop and maintain this lifelong relationship with this client, which is where the real value in the relationship is. It's the flywheel effect all over again.
Yep. And you're not talking about it, though, in the traditional way that we have talked about our flywheel before in terms of intake and marketing and all of that. You're actually talking about it in about 5 different metrics, 6 different metrics
I haven't counted. I don't know.
6. I just did the
You
math.
did it. You just count. See, you look at this stuff. I just go.
So
Just go.
we're going to talk about operations today, and I'm just going to introduce them. Workflow design is the first one. Standardization is the second. Capacity and workload management is the third. Performance metrics for the fourth. Continuous improvement in the fifth. And technology as the sixth. So these are the 6 components, Marc, that you're going to talk about operations today and how that all yields into your customer service.
Correct. And I think you start with the first question: why are law firms' operations so weak? And I'm not saying everybody, but let's face it, when we all started our law firm, our operations probably were below where they are now. And then hopefully, in a year from now, they'll be better. In 2 years from now, better. In other words, we're always trying to get better at it. But the basic problem is, when I started my first law firm, when I first started this law firm, everything was in my head. I knew how I wanted it to be done, but nothing was on paper. Nothing had been thought through. We were winging it. We were literally winging it. And why was that? Because nobody ever taught us how to do it. I didn't know. Law school doesn't teach you this stuff. I had mentors, but nobody ever taught my mentors. My mentors did it very poorly as well. So what happens is every case kind of got handled differently. There was no uniformity in how we developed cases because everything was in my head. And if my head wasn't in it that day, or if I didn't happen to be around, it just, things just went in different directions. And I started relying on my staff to do things as opposed to relying on the systems. And I think this is kind of, the crux of it. A good business is a series of systems run by people. Okay. So the people become interchangeable because people come and go, but the systems need to be developed and the systems need to be consistent in order for you to deliver consistent service over time. This is classic Kaizen.
Yeah, and I think that, the thing, not only is it's hard because it changes over time and as your business grows. So the way that you ran your firm when you only had, maybe 10 employees and you used to get your birthday off, right?
I think I used to, yes.
Yeah, we used to.
Wait a minute, my
I've
birthday's on
heard-
Thanksgiving. We always get my birthday off.
I heard that you used to give employees your birthday off, or was it a birthday bonus or something?
We used to give a birthday bonus.
But those things tend to disappear as your firm grows, and then as you invest in technology, everything changes. And so operations is a living, breathing thing.
Yeah. So, one of the challenges is we're a professional services firm. We don't build widgets. We don't build TVs. We don't build God knows what. We don't build, oil and
We're
gas
not on a
valve.
line.
We're not on an assembly line.
Mhm.
Okay. So when you're in a services business, every case is going to be slightly different. You're not creating true uniformity. Every case has different personalities, different people, different set of facts, different set of issues. So that makes it tough to keep things uniform, but it can be done systematically in a sort of customizable way, because every case has to be customized to the particular client, but you can still do it in a systematic way. And I think that's the point of what we're going to talk about here with the 6 things, as you've counted, that have to deal with running a good operation. So with that, we'll be right back.
This podcast is sponsored by Marc Whitehead Associates, a national disability benefits law firm. Marc Whitehead runs a firm of over 60 dedicated people whose mission is to make a difference in the lives of our injured and disabled clients. Marc represents disabled claimants in Social Security disability, private disability insurance, and veterans disability claims in all 50 states. Marc Whitehead is double board certified in both Social Security disability law and personal injury trial law. Marc has litigated disability cases in over 40 states and counting, and can help your clients too. Stop throwing your phone calls away. Call Marc Whitehead at 701-VIP-LEAD. That's 701-VIP-LEAD. Or visit our website at disabilitydenials.com. Referral fees are paid in all jurisdictions where it is permitted. Refer us your disability cases today and know that your clients will be in good hands.
All right, Diana. So we're going to talk about the 6 operational elements. I like to call them elements with regard how to run a airtight law firm. This is what you do on a daily basis. So why don't you take this one? Tell us about how you do workflow design.
That's a great question, Mark. So the way I think about operations and the way that I would have structured this outline, people, processes, technology, right? So processes, the way that I work processes is very different than the way that my team works or any of our operations actually works with processes because I'm troubleshooting processes. If I'm involved, something broke and I'm troubleshooting. So big, for example, before I came into this recording of this shoot, we had a 1-star review and I was troubleshooting why. And over a course of probably 6 emails now, all I've done is say, but why? But why? And they're like, oh, wait, I looked into it further. So for me, processes is trying to figure out why the system broke. For example, our last podcast, we talked extensively about systemology and that book. And so I think there's probably nothing better on how to design a system, which is design a workflow process, than going back to systemology and going through those. I think there were 7 elements there. But for me, every piece of the firm has to have a process. And the way that I do my job, since you tossed this one to me,
I did, didn't
is
I?
I
Just
look.
tossed the grenade.
You just did, but that's okay because I look for where the system broke. Why did the client have a bad experience? You can only really operate on an 80-20. And if you're finding more of the 20 repeatedly, whether that's with one particular case manager, or as I like to say, that if there's one particular handoff that is starting to break more often, usually it's because Social Security is taking a little bit longer and we need to finesse that wait time a little bit longer.
So the way I think about workflow design is one of my favorite terms is I like to whiteboard the shit out of things. So when I whiteboard the shit out of something, I literally get a whiteboard and I have one in my office and it flips. So you whiteboard one side and then you flip it and then you whiteboard the shit out of the second side. And I learned this process back when I took computer programming back in 1988, which just shows you how long ago. And the first thing they did is they handed us one of these little templates, these little drawing templates. And they were teaching us that, you start with a problem and then you draw a line to the first step, and the first step might have a decision tree. A decision tree was designated by a diamond, and off the diamond, you had certain outcomes. You had if a positive outcome, a neutral outcome, maybe a negative outcome, and then you just followed the decision tree. And this is how you design software. I just went down a rabbit hole. Very boring crap, but it taught me how to think about workflows. Because you do the same thing. So I whiteboard out, say, our SSD process. I'm going to skip the market and intake side, but when the case first comes in, what do we have to do? We start with an onboarding process, and then you have to file their application. That's the next step. And then you get a decision on the application. There's your decision tree. Was it a positive outcome? Was it a negative outcome? Was it a neutral outcome? And then you have a path that goes off in the process, depending on what outcome you get. And then you go to the next decision tree and the same thing, it all branches off. And you just basically plot out the course of the representation. And at each of those things that means there's a process. And you have to basically, you start off writing out the process, but I like to create visual processes because most people are visual. But a flow chart is basically just a flow chart.
So in today's world, I would recommend using Looms, and even we looked at Scribed. I think it's Scribed that will do a screen recording and create a process for you rather than whiteboarding the shit.
I still like the whiteboard.
And I think that that's
I
a
have
great
pretty
idea.
colors.
I think that whiteboarding works as long as you don't get stuck trying to optimize while you're whiteboarding. And I think that having been in several sessions with you, you get to try to use systemology. You like to
Well, no.
optimize.
So I'm just creating a process. This is how it should work. I'm not saying this is how you're actually doing it. Now, I'm making the assumption that this is a new process, that we're creating something new, not trying to fix something old. So anyway, what's the next one?
Standardization.
All
What do
right.
you mean by that, Mark?
So even though every case is unique, many of the tasks are repeatable. So examples of standardization, intake scripts. You want your intake department to ask the same questions in the same order every time if they can, because it creates better data. It creates better decisions about whether we want to take that case or not. I had one person who used to type in people's name in all caps, and then throughout the entire course of the representation, their name was stuck in all caps. Just little things like that. Because the data that comes in at the very beginning is the data that's going to flow through the case throughout the whole system. When it gets stuck in our case management system, it's kind of there forever, or at least until somebody fixes it. So standardizing how you do medical records requests, so we can put that in our process, so we know that there's a standardized follow-up timetable for medical records that don't show up and things that happen. We have discovery checklists. Discovery has to be done a certain way. It may be, you may modify it slightly, but we know that we're going to send interrogatories, requests for production. We know we're going to request the depositions, at least on an IDI case. We're going to request the deposition of all the experts that the other side designates. That's just standard stuff. It just has to happen, And what happens is when it becomes standardized, that stuff can get pushed down to a lower level. So my attorneys don't have to do that. My litigation paralegals can send out the notices because they know that's how it's supposed to go. So that's the whole point. Standardization, it creates consistency, it creates training efficiencies, and it's good quality control. Make sure things happen. So
So I think that what I took from that, Mark, when you say standardization is, decision fatigue or choice fatigue is a very real thing for all of us. We've talked about that here. I mean, just ordering a simple coffee these days at Starbucks is not that simple as you think it is. From your choice of milk to the size that you want to, all the different toppings.
what the hell
you
does
can
venti mean? Please,
add.
somebody.
Very big cup of coffee. So I think what you're
Can-
trying to eliminate for your team is the things that are repeatable should be automated. And so leaving them the bandwidth, the mental bandwidth to be able to make those higher level decisions. And so when I think about standardization, I think about all the handoffs and making sure that there are automations to ensure that there's consistency. We talk a lot about that. I think that the underlying theme with a successful operations team is consistency. And so automations allow for that to happen, from everything from the timing, this must happen within 60 days of that task getting completed, all the way to the messaging. So if it's important enough, our message needs to be the same.
So the other thing about the consistency part is absenteeism. So let's say the Social Security team, we have 18 people on that team?
Yeah, probably 19.
What are the odds that all 18 or 19 of them show up every single day this week? Almost none. When has that ever happened? With standardization and consistency, at least other people can pick up that person's job when they're out. People can look at the file and understand what's going on, and can pick up the slack.
One of the things that, especially that I'm finding now, as I'm delving into our Social Security department even more, is that, we have suggested templated responses, right? To make sure that we're using compassion with our information, right?
You will be
I'm sorry.
compassionate, and we will beat it into you.
I'm sorry that, I'm sorry that you've been denied. These are the next steps, not just we received your denial. You'll hear from us in 60 days or whatever. We'll file your denial in 7
Seriously.
days. And so one of the things that we're finding is that, like, okay, great. We need the templated responses need to be more human. And so I was confused where you were going with your standardization and plug and play with our team.
Well, my point would be is that we have absenteeism. We always have, we always will, because we have humans. And the more uniform things are, the easier it is for the substitute person to come in behind the absent person and pick up and figure out what they're doing, because it's all kind of standardized. I'm not saying to standardize it to remove the compassion. I'm just saying it's done in a uniform way. Therefore, it's easier to move bodies around when you need to move bodies around. And invariably we do on a team that large. That's what I meant.
What's our third element?
Oh, this is the one that you and I fight over. Capacity and workload management.
We fight about a lot of things.
Well,
but
I
think
know,
we fight
but-
about this one.
So operations requires understanding of how much the firm can realistically handle. For example, what is the case load that a typical case manager should be able to handle? And you and I dicker over this all the time. And I get it. The more technology you give to people, in theory, the higher the caseload that they should be able to handle. I worry about sometimes that we create burnout because our people do have a relatively high caseload. I like to be slightly under their capacity as opposed to at their capacity, would be the way I would phrase it, to try to minimize the burnout factor.
Determining capacity is absolutely a hard. I think that could be a podcast in and of itself, and you'd have to almost go back to your first element of workflow design, how people are structuring their day, how they're using said technology, how they're using even additional resources that we've given them to be able to manage the caseload. So, yes, there is tension between whether people are underutilized or overutilized in the firm, including our attorneys.
Yeah, and some of it is just about evening out the workflow. It's not a matter of all the cases have to get handled, and they're going to have to get handled by the people we currently have. So hiring new people is more of a long-term solution when the caseloads get high. But one of the things you have to worry about is when the caseloads get uneven, and that can cause problems in a couple of ways. For the case managers, if one person is handling 50 more cases than another case manager, they know this. All this is public information that we go over. So sometimes they can get a little unhappy about
That
those
should
things.
never happen.
It
That
shouldn't
never
happen.
happens, actually.
I'm not saying it happens necessarily in our firm, but it happens in firms.
Okay, got it. All right.
I'm not using us as the example.
I would have used that
I
as
just offended her. She's like,
Yeah.
I would never let that happen.
I would never. That would have been a massive failure. That's 101 in my book, to never allow that
I would say that
inequity to
it's-
happen.
Sometimes it's the flip with the attorneys. The attorneys will get irritated if one of the other attorneys has more cases than they do because that's how they make their money. Or the other attorney may have what they perceive to be better cases than their cases.
You need to go back to my podcast on culture and transparency and creating routes for your attorneys to get higher cases.
Yeah, so it can work both ways is all I'm trying to say.
I completely agree. And so one of the metrics that I think about when you think about capacity and workload management is time on desk.
Yes,
A lot.
absolutely.
I think about time on desk because do you have more cases because you're just not moving them? I mean, I think you could probably say that a lot for the pre-lit. If you don't have time on desk for your pre-lit and your PI case or PI law firms, like, are you holding on to them because, again, there's a financial incentive there?
Yeah, or just a neglect or laziness or poor time management. There could be a lot of reasons for extended time on desk. None of them are good.
One of the things, to your point about neglect, that I'm trying to implement across the firm. One of the departments is better at it than others, but every matter should have a task. Every open matter should have a task in our law firm, and I'm trying to get there. It's slow going for certain departments, but if you have a task for that matter, there should be no way that you have neglect because we track how many past due tasks you have and whether you're completing your tasks on time or you're just moving the deadline. So that's one way that we found works in departments with longer time on desk, just inherently depending on this practice area.
Mm-hmm. All right, the next, performance metrics. So operations improve when you are able to track your results, when you're able to measure your results.
KPIs.
KPIs, yes. I was shocked the other day that I said the word KPIs in front of an attorney at the AAJ conference in San Diego, and they asked me what a KPI was.
Oh.
I was floored. I was like,
Was it one of your attorneys?
in this day and age, no, it was not one of my attorneys. But in this day of age, you have to explain to somebody what a KPI is. Sometimes we forget. We're a large firm. We have a lot of opportunity to bring in consultants and go to conferences and do all of these things. And you forget, there are small law firms out there that are, one person shops, maybe a paralegal or two, maybe out there that are listening, that don't really go to these types of conferences. They don't hear these types of things, and they're still working off of their case list is on a spreadsheet. It still happens. It may seem foreign to us, but I'm sure it's there. That's how I used to do it. I have to think back when I first started my practice. What did I actually had a yellow pad. I had my cases on a yellow pad. That's how I knew what I had.
Well, I think it also just depends on what your day-to-day is. If your day-to-day is the technician, like we talked about in our prior podcast, and all you're doing is working, I am sure there are legal terms as it relates to, discovery or different things that where a lawyer would be aghast and say, you don't know what that means? You're a lawyer. You're a lawyer for 20 years now. You don't, because it depends. My world now lives in the business world. And so I think that is a very good reminder, especially as you start to introduce KPIs to your team, to keep saying what they mean, because their world is, the SSA team, they say, well, that's form 1696, and they just rattle off form numbers and have very cogent discussions with each other about what the forms mean. I'm like, guys, take it back. Tell me what each form means, because I can't help you understand what happened if you don't tell me. And they look at me and they're like, oh,
You're so
that's
cute.
cute.
She doesn't know what a 314 is.
Yeah. So I think it just
She
depends
doesn't know
on
what
the
a
world you're in.
1696 is.
Yeah,
That
they
is
do.
so
They
cute.
literally look at me like that,
Yeah,
which is
okay.
okay. I'm okay with that. But, one of the things, Mark, so what are some of your KPIs that you think that everyone should be tracking?
Well, some very obvious ones. The number of cases you sign every month, and the source. We mentioned that last time, case cycle time. You need to know how long your cases are lasting, and particularly per stage. For us, we have various stages: initial app, recon, hearing level, AC level. In a PI practice, you have pre-lit, and you can break pre-lit down into, initial demand, client recovery time. Demand is out. How long is the demand out before you get a response? You can break it down in all these little subcategories, but you need to know the life cycle of a case, and you need to know what the standard life cycle is, or what the benchmark is. And if you're going over the benchmark, why? Why is this case dragging out so long? What can I do to move it? And also, what can you do in general to reduce the cycle time? How can I get my demands out quicker? How can I maybe do medical monitoring on the client to make sure the client is getting treated as quickly as possible and reaching MMI as quickly as possible? There's all sorts of things that you can look at in your cycle time to, number one, monitor to make sure it isn't going too long, and number two, iterate, try to figure out ways to shorten your cycle time, because long cycle times equal lost money.
Yep. And since we're talking about customer service, I think I'd be remiss to not mention, of course, the NPS score, and customer satisfaction. It's pretty much included in every tool that we look at these days, but case status is what we use for NPS at our firm. And so
clients rate us 1 to 10
on whether or not they would basically refer us or recommend us to a friend or family member. And so you're always hoping for an 8 to a 10.
Yes.
9 to a 10.
However, when you get those 5s, they're doing you a favor, because they're telling you something's wrong.
It's a yellow flag.
It's the canary in the coal mine. So, always call the 5s, and number one, thank them for being responsive. And number two, could you give us some feedback? Because we'd like to do better. So, and they become your best friends when you do that. The next, fifth, the continuous improvement cycle, the Kaizen method. Kaizen, always continually improving, continually iterating, basically trying to make continual improvements every day. So if we can make one small improvement every day, at the end of the year, I've made 365 improvements, and I am way down the road on getting better at what I'm doing. So, so when you're talking about continual improvement, always look, what is slowing you down? Where are your choke points in your process, in your system? Where the errors occurring. You usually will see a pattern that errors happen. They usually tend to be the same errors over and over again until you fix your system. And what processes out there are you looking at that could be simplified? Always be looking to simplify processes. Again, that improves your cycle time. When the processes are simpler, they take less time. So That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, so I think about it a little bit differently. I don't think about implementing or asking the team to make 365 changes a year because that's just overwhelming. One of the things that we've tried to do this year, getting I've gotten the idea from some of the books you've asked us to read, Mark, is a post-mortem. So whenever we get a one-star review, we'll actually go through and do a deep dive into what happened, almost producing a date by date, case opened on, the 1st of
A
January.
total timeline
Of
every
every
event.
single thing, and then having the team look at it and say, "Okay, guys, where do we go wrong?" And then they realize over time that it's not, "Well, we, got a date wrong in a good cause letter." No, that wasn't it, but it was the accumulation of small little things over time that led to that one-star review, and so they see, I think.
Death by a thousand cuts.
They did, and especially for our clients who have such a long process that they just over time, it just builds up, and so, it allows them to think about Kaizen or, just improving over time, how one little error could, become a much bigger one, and so, I think the postmortems are a good one. We talked about it in High Trust Leadership about how, you need, absolute candor. I love that phrase, absolute candor in your debrief because it does require trust. One of the things that I ask the team all the time is, hey guys, let's not think about this from, hey, that case manager got the one-star review because it could have been any of us.
All right, our sixth and final element here, a good operational plan, is technology as an operational tool. You love use some tech. You got you a stout tech stack over there.
Yes, and thank you, Mark. I appreciate your investment in the tech in this firm. I do think that tech can absolutely help, especially in this day and age. If you're not investing in tech as a law firm, you're probably you're gonna fall behind. Even if it's not AI, just because all of the other firms are investing in good tech. And so some of the systems, Mark, that you love that have been here before me.
Well, number one, the backbone is Litify. That's our case management software that handles our intake process. It handles our operations. It handles a lot of our marketing function, at least the database side of things. So if you don't have a good CRM system, go get one. It is 2026.
Well, and I think, it's cloud-based, so, make sure I know a lot of people, big firms that are still in their server base because they haven't figured out one that they like, so they're probably creating their own at this point that's cloud-based, and it's easy enough, I think, with, some of the AI tools that you have these days, but, we're lucky because Litify actually has very robust reporting tools within
Right.
the system,
So
unlike Filevine
we
or
have-
others.
Yeah, we have a report over literally everything you can possibly imagine. Anything you want, we can create a report for it.
As long as it lives in Litify.
As long as it lives in Litify. This is the problem. We have certain people who kind of create their little kingdoms outside of Litify, and like, no, come back.
Yeah. And so it has to live in Litify consistently. And so one of the other things that I don't think that I see here, Mark, that I think is invaluable tech these days is an integrated phone system to your case management software, because that is client experience. That's the first client experience.
Right. So clients typically talk to us on the phone.
Well, they'll call in, and especially if they're calling in the second time, they expect you almost these day and age to know who they are and where they innately, right? Because this happens. I've called doctor's offices before and they know, okay, and, sure, they'll confirm a couple of things. They'll wait for me to say why I'm calling. Like, okay, and this is Miss Berry, right? And I'm like, yep, that's me. And so they know, right? Because we all have the integrated phone systems to whatever doc management system that you're using. So I highly recommend that. And of course, I do love our texting. I love Banjaxed. For us, they're very simple, which for us makes it it's more affordable because it's all within Litify, and they also offer other solutions. But I do like our texting ability because, again, it's part of the client experience and clients expect it.
I would say one of the biggest technology tools that we've implemented lately is the Foundation AI.
Yep.
And you have to explain that one because I I'm having a hard time of understanding the magic fairies that work there, but
Well, I don't know that I could
it's just magic. Something magical happens.
I don't know that I explain the magical fairies either, but what it does is it takes our mail, and our mail is scanned in still by a human. We haven't figured out how to automate that part. And then once the mail is identified, then it goes into our case management software and automatically sets tasks. And so now we're getting to the optimization part of that tool to where some of our documents aren't even being seen by the team. So what we're trying to do, we used to have a very high level team member
Just to give you
scanning
some
the
background,
mail,
we get about 2 boxes,
at
crates of
least.
mail a day from the government because the government still operates via mail.
And of course, you have 2 practice areas, Mark.
2
So
governmental practice areas.
you have
So
2. And so both of those governmental practice areas have moved to Foundation AI. And so we used to have very high level team members scanning in the mail and then processing the mail because it's just that important.
because every
Sure.
piece of mail triggers a task.
And yeah, and you could have an intern scan in the mail, but what if they forget to scan it front and back? Or what if they, just don't, it was
Or what
just
if they do
too,
what interns do, which is don't show up?
yep. And so, it was just too high risk to have it done. And so the hope is now that you can delegate some of the scanning in, but other pieces of it just get processed by the system. And if they fall below a 99% threshold, then we are alerted and it sets off, and then it actually requires a human.
Yeah. So two notes I wrote down. Number 1, technology supports your operation, but it does not replace process design. Process design is very important. So technology actually works best after your processes are clearly defined. Again, technology is a tool. It's not the end-all be-all. So it needs to fit within the process that you've created.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. With that, we'll be right back. This is Marc Whitehead, lawyer, entrepreneur, and business coach. Thanks for listening to the Successful Barrister podcast. If we've stirred your juices, hit me up with an email at marc@marcwhitehead.com. Remember, Marc is spelled with a C. And get on the Successful Barrister newsletter mailing list. Even better, let's set up a call. I'd love to talk to you about working together, talk shop, or just shooting the breeze. All right, Diana. So let's wrap this up strong. I'm going to go through our 5 action steps going forward as it relates to operations of the law firm. Who goes first?
You,
Why do I get to go first?
because you've got number 1.
That's such a rote answer. Okay, fine. All right. So number 1 on my list, or should I say number 1 on our list, because we actually figured this out ahead of time. We don't totally wing this we wing most of this podcast, but we don't wing it all.
I wing too much at this podcast.
No, we don't. So number 1, map the life cycle of one typical case in your firm from the intake process all the way to resolution. And throughout mapping that process, map all the contingencies that could happen at each inflection point, at each decision point. You could send a demand letter out and get a 0 offer letter back, a no liability offer. All right, that's one inflection point. Or you could get a demand out and the offer comes back ridiculously low. Or you could get a demand out and the offer comes back reasonable. You could get a demand out and you have a settlement. Okay, now you got to deal with lien resolution. There's all sorts of inflection points within the process that are contingent upon the thing that happened prior to it. So you want to map all that out and see where, and quite frankly, put a timeline on it. Like this should all happen within 3 months or 6 months or 12 months, whatever the number is. Set yourself a benchmark at each stage of how long this should take.
All right. Number 2 for me was from this podcast is to pick one process and standardize it. So I would start, it's always like, okay, which one, Diana? I would start with the one that's giving you the most grief, obviously, right? But the idea is that one tends to be the most troublesome, so it's the most overwhelming. But even if you can standardize 80%, 20%, even 50% of that part of the process, you'll see immediate improvement in client service.
Yeah. So number 3 on the list is determine where cases stall or where bottlenecks occur. Figure out where things get hung up. And here's my tip, and this is one of the great things I like about being in the groups that we are, either Atticus or PILMA or different things like that, is they all have listservs, and you can post it on the listserv. And I guarantee you somebody out there has run across the same problem and probably has figured out a solution or figured out a technology or a vendor or just has an idea about how to break that bottleneck. So you don't have to come up with it all on your own. Figure out where the bottleneck is and then ask. We are on the TTLA listserv. I have 800 lawyers on the other end of that listserv. And if I have a question or a problem or I'm stuck on something, toss it out there. Same thing with PILMA. We're on the PILMA listserv. You have something out there, toss it on the listserv. Somebody has dealt with this problem before and probably has an ideal or a solution or technology that could help you.
And number 4 for me was to evaluate your KPIs and make sure they still work for your firm. Again, KPI stands for Key Performance Indicators. Mark and I did probably 3 years ago now, is I asked him to reevaluate his KPIs because I didn't think they worked for us. We were just coming out of COVID, and I think the time on desk was too long and your average fee was wrong. And then now we reevaluate our average fee at the end of every year rather than assuming. Do you remember what it was when I started? You don't have to say the number, but our Social Security average fee is much different now than it was when I started.
Right.
And on the good end, right?
It's
so
improved.
you've got it's improved a lot. So some of that was obviously the increase in our fee, but it's you have to evaluate your KPIs, and then going back to our systemology podcast, less is more.
Gotcha. So number 5 on my list is schedule quarterly operational reviews to refine processes and improve efficiency. So don't just set it and forget it. You need to look at these things periodically. I think quarterly is a good number. You can look at it quicker than you can look at it monthly if you really wanted to, but I think at a minimum quarterly, look at your processes and see how they're doing. Check your benchmarks. Maybe things have changed. We had to increase the benchmark on some of our Social Security processes because basically Doge happened and the government slowed down. So all of a sudden the government slowdown caused us to slow down. So we had to reevaluate some of our workflows. Hopefully that was temporary. I think it's bouncing back a little bit, at least from what I'm gathering. But always be looking, always be refining, always be trying to improve. So just set a regular cadence of I'm trying to improve. That's what I would do.
Your outline was great, Mark.
Why are you rolling your eyes at me like that?
I think it was interesting. It was an interesting take on operations, and I didn't roll my eyes.
Okay, well, you were rolling your eyes in your head.
That's absolutely true.
So I would just to go back to the source material, just to reiterate. This is coming from Critical Business Skills, which is a course that you can get on the Great Courses app. And it's a subscription model for $30 a month or something like that. You have access to all of these, what I call college level courses. So I highly recommend it to everybody. I love it. I kind of geek out over this stuff. That would be my one tip is go check out the Great Courses. They have all kind of cool stuff. They have a course on how to play Grandmaster chess that I'm in the middle of right now. I'm relearning, even though I know how to play chess, I'm learning how to play good chess right now. So it's a great thing.
Very cool.
All right. With that, I want to thank everybody for listening to the Successful Barrister podcast, where legal legends are made. I'm Mark.
And I'm Diana.
And together we're the dynamic duo of law. So if you've enjoyed this episode today, please rate and review us and share it with your fellow overworked lawyers. Hit that share button. And if you want to check out more episodes or resources, check us out at successfulbarrister.com or hit me up at my email address, mark@markwhitehead.com. I spell Mark with a C, so remember that part. It's Mark on both sides of the at. Some people get this confused with this. And don't forget to visit our sponsor, Marc Whitehead Associates, a national disability law firm at www.disabilitydenials.com. So until next time, run a practice, not a prison. Bye.
Bye.